gastric aspirate, swallowed sputum goes out of the stool. So you find DNA there, it is not fully degenerated, so you could make it. When it came to begin with, there was a difficulty that stool samples required a lot of pre-processing. So that was not feasible. So now there are simpler terms, methods which are available, method called single step concentration. Trouble is, should you be asking for a stool sample when you can do sputum or gastric aspirate? So that is something which is important, and that is what is going to be answered by sensitivity and specificity. The stool sample is not more sensitive than sputum. It is less sensitive than sputum. So it may be easy to check, but then you are compromised. So I would use stool if patient is not willing, is far off, gastric aspirate is not feasible for any reason, but child would लेटता ही नहीं, कराता ही नहीं. Then remember, you are compromising. You are going for something which is less effective. If you look at the expert on stool, with culture positive, you are doing about 70%. That means you are losing 30%, which would have been picked maybe otherwise. So that is something which we have to remember, that stool is not as great. And these come from a systematic review, which actually the range is 0 to 100, and median may actually not, maybe little less than what we see here. The second important thing which is there is that we have two tests which are available to us, expert and ultra, right? So there is a difference. When we use conventional expert, which most of the time when you send to a government facility, which will be done, because government program does not provide you ultra for reasonable reasons, then the limit of detection is about 110, 120 vessels, DNA count. Culture requires same numbers, a smear requires 10,000. So that's a much better test than smear. But when you use ultra, this goes down to about 15 to 20. So you are able to get a much faster detection of LPA. The moment you have more sensitive tests, then the legacy of a previous test or a prior infection gives you false positive more often. The moment you go into ultra, you will get trace positives, which will not give you answers for rifampicin legacy. So it always compromises you in a certain phase. But when you are going to stool, where the amount of DNA after denaturing would be less, then perhaps ultra would be a better test than that. But then there are studies which are showing that with concentration methods, they may be good. So this is something new. Now guidelines are very easily available on the net. Everybody reads, and you read some highlights from A, B, C, medical, non-medical dialogues, and WhatsApp University is always there. But we must understand where it is coming from, and it has its own implications. So that is where I am.
Yeah, so there has been some additional yield of doing a stool sample if you add on to respiratory sample, and we'll talk about it more as we go through. So
less than 10%.
yeah.
I would still say in your algorithm is a repeat specimen. Repeat specimen would also have an addition yield of 20 to 15. It's the quality of specimen which is important. So while you can do stool, which is okay, it is there in the guideline. But if you have an option of doing both, perhaps not going towards stool is not necessarily correct. Program will say it. Program says it because they are not pediatricians available all over country. For them to get a second specimen to bring the child back to a health facility is harder. So program may go towards using stool. But for pediatricians here, if you do two sputum or you do a sputum and a stool, perhaps two sputum would be better.
So we have a timer running here, which is ticking. So briefly, sir, in 2-3 minutes, please enlighten the audience about the current test, and we move on to the newer test which everyone wants to hear.
So it's easy. We talked about expert rate. Be very careful. This expert is XPERT. You have a lot of Korean and Chinese origin tests which are EXPERT. तो हम इन experts की दुनिया से उस expert की दुनिया में गए, दोनों फेक हैं. Remember this, there is only one proven expert which is XPERT. It's a trade name. I have no shares in this company. They don't have any IPO, and I have no reason to recommend it. It's the only WHO recommended CBNAT which is fully automated. Okay. Then we have an Indian origin. which is almost as good, is semi-automated. It requires a shift of DNA. It's largely, I would say, automated and can be done even in the periphery. It is fairly good. And when Trump and the like say that हम ये देंगे कि नहीं देंगे, हो सकता है कल हमें expert नहीं मिले तो TrueNAT हमारे पास है, which is good, made in India, and it works. You do not have to repeat a test if it is come positive by expert to confirm by TrueNAT or TrueNAT by expert. They are same. So do not think ये तो TrueNAT में आया आपने कहा इसको expert करा, there is no need. They being the same, right? Line probe is another nucleic acid amplification test, which is not automated, which is little complex. So it requires DNA separation, a much bigger lab, and therefore it is a batch test. It's not individually run test. So you would have a batch being run together. So your results may come in 48 hours to about 7 days. Actual run time is about one day of lab is required, but that's how it works. The problem is its limit of detection is 10 pounds, just like smear. So it can only be done in a smear positive. And has only been validated for sputum, though people are doing for other things. So that's the trouble with line probe assay. Advantage is you can get line probe assay for rifampicin as well as iron. You can also get for second line for fluoroquinolone, for injectable. So line probe assay comes handy to us if it is smear positive older patient, or it comes handy to us that culture has come positive. You don't have to wait another 6 weeks for getting culture sensitivity. Now you have millions of bacilli. From the culture isolate, you can run an LPA, within a day you would know the sensitivity. So that's the advantage of LPA, knowing about it. And smear therefore goes hand in hand. The second important thing is in follow-up. We all talked of 80% negativity in a responsive case at the end of 2 months. That will not happen with any of the NATs. So if you are using expert or TrueNAT, it will stay positive even when your patient is improving at the end of intensive case. So for a follow-up, you would need a smear. The NAT is not going to help you. NAT in fact about 10% then may be positive even at the end of therapy because dead bacilli also have the same DNA. So that's something important to do. Cultures are something which we have to get into habit of. Always Dr. Kukreja just went before me and he used to say we have to develop culture of doing cultures. So the culture of doing culture, that's something all infectious disease experts now say. So MGIT TB culture is also something which is important. It's a liquid culture. It is faster. It's better than the solid erstwhile tilted.
Okay, so the follow-up of this child, so this child actually had a rifampicin-resistant tuberculosis. Just reiterating the point that a universal DST is something which we should strive for. Children can have a transmitted drug resistance and even your naive patients can have a DR-TB, although the chances would be less. Okay, let's come up to newer test and we have 10 minutes before we are asked to or we are thrown out of the stage. So we'll be very quick. We'll talk about newer test, benefits, limitations, availability and the current status. So Dr. Sangeeta ma'am, we are talking about initial test for diagnosis of drug resistance. So the upfront test which we do. We have talked about the current tests which are available, which are the ExpertRif and the TrueNAT. Can you tell us something about the newer available tests which are called as moderate complexity NATs?
So this is now a moderate complexity automated NAT. The test, different companies have come up with different tests, but what our government has recommended under NTP is PathoDetect test. So that is moderate complexity automated NAT, and it has a limit of detection of 25 colony forming units for MTB, and it also gives us rifampicin as well as INH resistance. But for that, the limit of detection is 250 CFUs per ml. But the results, they are available within 2 hours. So that is a big advantage because it tells us not only about rifampicin, like low complexity NATs, that is TrueNAT, Expert Ultra, they tell us only about rifampicin resistance. This tells us about rifampicin and INH resistance both.
Okay, so you have a few tests which are listed here, which are approved by the WHO. We have another test, PathoDetect, which is developed in India. and there is some data which is available.
No,
and
PathoDetect, it's our own indigenous product by my lab and manufactured in Pune. When these guidelines they were updated by the WHO, by the time the results were not available. But now PathoDetect has got approval from our own central drug standard, control organization.
Yeah.
So, and approved by ICMR and also taken up by NTP under the program.
Okay, so this is a newer test and which can tell you upfront about arsine and INH. Okay, so we have Dr. Singh already has talked about Expert RIF Ultra, that the limit of detection is less and hence it has advantages. So briefly, can you tell everyone, because I understand that Ultra is not a part of the national program as of now, but it is available commercially across all good commercial labs. So, in just 1 to 2 minutes briefly, what are the problems you see with Ultra which everyone should be careful about?
Ultra is a good test because its limit of detection is 16 CFUs per ml. But then obviously it has got limitations. By trace, it means that the bacillary load is even less than 16. So in that case, this strength of bacilli is not, now there are two questions over here. Whether the diagnosis of tuberculosis is confirmed, yes or no. The diagnosis of tuberculosis would be there if there is no past